I think it's strange because committed. It's I think the 20th or something like 20th event already. I thought it's will be just working. Okay. Okay, I think we would wait a little bit until I will get go from Victor again. Just yeah. Okay, I actually wanted also to add something. I don't know if I supposed as a moderator also make some remarks, but I think as a moderator I will just do remarks. Okay, but it's I think it's not that good if nobody can hear us. Hopefully, Victor, can you tell us if it is recorded? Because in any case, if it is recorded, then it could be put online later, and then everybody will at least hear what we were talking about, like in the recording of the video. Victor, now we're live again.
Yay.
Okay. Okay, I don't know if I think we will not repeat everything that we were talking about. Yes? I will, just in case, make a very, very short repetition introduction who are we here in case it wasn't live from the beginning. So we have Johan Haliby as a representative of Rest Assured. That's Java-based framework, very popular framework for writing, for coding API test. We are having Antonella Caboni, who is a co-worker, co-developer in Pact project, which is for consumer-driven, so-called consumer-driven contract testing. Then we have Ole Lensma, who is who is the creator of SOAP UI, a big tool for doing almost everything, probably with with APIs. I think Ole will tell a few words about it later on. And we have an independent tool-independent consultant, Radu Vunvulea from Romania here. And so the first questions we were discussing was about why do we need the API testing in general. So why can't we just rely on unit test and on end-to-end test? And a couple of very good opinions were told by our participants. And now I will just add to what I hopefully you will it will be on the recordings. I will just add that the end-to-end test, in my opinion, they are almost always by design, by nature, they are very slow and they are so-called flaky, like they don't stable in the sense that rerunning them could show you different results. So you are actually normally you're not able to cover enough of your application with just end-to-end tests. So you must go on deeper levels, and perhaps API level is a good compromise between too small scoped unit test and like I said, too slow end-to-end test. If you agree with me. Okay, so the next question, I will try to go in systematic of API testing. We have pretty different tools, beginning from perhaps just coding with Rest Assured, some other frameworks, or full-fledged environments like SOAP UI or Postman, and something quite different in approach, which is also related to API testing, like testing on contract level. Um, so perhaps we will go tool by tool, and you can also add your additional comments and your additional opinions. Perhaps I am also missing some tool variation, some specific tool which are not which doesn't fall in one of these categories. Perhaps why don't we start with like coding, and as example, Rest Assured framework and Johan. So as far as I know, Rest Assured is pretty popular, and it's just about coding. It's not a tool which is having some UI. Is it right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. What do you think about about in particular YOTL and this the whole um, the whole scope of tools which are just concentrated on codings, about benefits and drawbacks? Uh, could you elaborate on this approach?
Yeah, yeah, I'll try. So yeah, I founded Rest Assured mainly because I needed something like this myself, and back then I couldn't find an alternative that I liked, at least. This was a while ago, so I don't really remember everything. But yeah, that's why I created it in the first place. And yeah, we were on the JVM. Everything was written in the JVM, so it was quite natural to just like have create a library that worked with the environment that we were currently using. So and that is the approach that I'm still using most of the time today when it comes to API testing. But that, of course, it can have limitations. I mean, Rest Assured is a library for well, Java and well, JVM, and I mean, everyone is not using the JVM, so Rest Assured is not applicable there. Arguably, I mean, you could write your test in Java anyways, but maybe there are better alternatives if not on the JVM.
Actually, how old is Rest Assured?
Yeah, I think it's 9 years or maybe 10.
9 years.
I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty. So we shouldn't say old. We should say matured. Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually true, because the most important bugs are already fixed, I guess. Yeah. But for me to understand, actually I think I know, but it means you can write tests for APIs in Java, or perhaps in some Java compiled languages like Kotlin or something. Yes. But
yes.
you can easily test APIs which are written with actually any language,
yes.
any programming
yes.
language. So it's not restricted to testing Java application. Yeah, but it helps.
Yeah, sorry. No, it helps because it integrates so well with the tools that you usually use in Java development. So I think it comes quite natural to use a tool like this.
Okay, can you just answer a few specific questions? Can it be used only with REST APIs, or can you use Rest Assured also with like standard web services, this SOAP WSDL, or even binary like protocols like gPRC? Can you?
Yeah. No, you can't use it with gRPC, but it's just I mean, Rest Assured is just an HTTP client with some some fancy API that is well suited for writing tests. So it's not a magical thing. It's just standard HTTP. So I mean, you can use it to test. I mean, REST is quite a you can use it to test REST services, but it's not limited to REST services. So you can use it for any like HTTP server service that you may have. And there's, I mean, one of the nice things, arguably, with Rest Assured is that it comes with a built-in expression language, if you like, that you can use to easily parse and extract data from JSON and XML and HTML documents. So I think that has contributed to the popularity of the library, because that has historically been quite verbose in Java, at least.
Yeah, sure. How do you think, how popular is actually Rest Assured? Is it? Do you know some competitors frameworks, or just who are just concentrated on coding, which are even more well known, even more known than Rest Assured?
I actually don't know, to be honest, but there are other. I mean, there are many other great libraries as well. For example, if you're using Spring, they have something called Spring Mock MVC, and Rest Assured actually has a wrapper around that as well to bring to make it run faster. If you're using Spring, you don't have to make actual HTTP invocations, but you can still use the Rest Assured API if you like. Or you could just use Spring Mock MVC. That's a great tool as well. And I mean, basically you can use any library you like to do tests. I mean, you don't have to use Rest Assured. There are many good libraries nowadays. When I started out, it was maybe a bit harder, but today there are, I don't know, a lot.
In typical JavaScript community, I think that will be every week a new framework concerning this.
Yeah, probably.
If not more. Radu, kannst du? Sorry, excuse me. Radu, do you know something from your more general expertise about popular tools which are regarding coding, or of course Antonella or Oli, if you know something, if you can add something on for the part of tools which are mostly just programming language frameworks for writing code. Radu? Oh no. Are you with us? Okay. Okay, then.
So there's definitely a lot of JavaScript libraries. Frisbee.js was one of the earlier ones. I don't know how it's evolved. There's also Karate, which is in the BDD world. There's a big interest in trying to, or in the BDD. Sorry, that was wrong. I think there's a big interest in the API testing world to see how BDD and Cucumber can be used to test APIs. So I think and Rest Assured fits in there, of course, with some of the syntax you have already. But the Karate is, I think, a project from Intuit that is open sourced, which is a framework where they basically have a pre-declared vocabulary for creating Cucumber scenarios for testing APIs. So I think, and on the JavaScript side, to your point, I mean, there's a lot of new libraries, but I think also the JavaScript world has matured quite a lot over the last years. So I'm sure there's a couple of pretty well-established frameworks there as well.
And now, when you say Karata, I actually can recall that I've seen Karata references a lot in the last years. Yeah, thank you for reminder. Okay, then why don't we just go further with UI-based tool when we are having all in focus on my screen. Okay, the other line of tools would be, I think, the most popular representatives are SOAP UI, which is, of course, one of the first instruments. I think I was working with it, like you're saying, 12, perhaps 10 or 12 years ago. And now the newer tool, which is gaining a great popularity, is Postman, of course, and they are, I guess, they are pretty similar. And could you, Ole, please tell us something about SOAP UI, and if you know probably about the major differences to Postman, and so you have the word.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So I just going back to echoing what Johan said. So SOAP UI was also project I created because I needed a tool like that. So it was very much driven out of my, scratching your own itch. At the time, I think and I was working as an architect on a SOA project where we had, WSDL-based web services, and there was really no tools. I think JMeter was the only thing that had something, close to making it easy to test SOAP services. And I think originally SOAP-UI was very much an exploratory testing tool, like Postman was initially as well. Where it's just a tool where you send requests and you see what you get back, and then from there it was used as a developer. I was writing a web service and I wanted just to send some requests and see that I got the right response, and it wasn't really used for structured API testing. And I think Postman was similar, but for REST, and I think they did that super well. SOAP-UI then evolved. We actually added REST support in 2008, but there's a curse in the name, of course. Everybody still thinks it's a SOAP tool. Of course, it has good SOAP support, but it's supported REST for 12 years now. And if you go up to the commercial tool version of SOAP-UI, you also have support for GraphQL and JDBC and AMF and MQTT and all these CoAP and a bunch of other protocols. So you can really go down that line just for functional testing. And over the years, it's also branched out into mocking and load testing and security testing. So I think what you mentioned earlier, it really has a smorgasbord, if I can use a Swedish word, of features for working with APIs and testing APIs and building APIs, etc. Postman is, of course, another great tool on the market. I think they've done remarkably well in building that tool in the community. They're really good at catering to the REST, world when that tool came, and in a similar way, it's evolved, by starting as I think it was a Chrome plugin, where if just to do tests for just request response kind of testing, as SOAP-UI was many years before, and then they've added a bunch more features over time. So more catering to the REST world than and to maybe more catering to how we build applications and APIs today, where I think SOAP-UI, for better or worse, is still stuck a little bit in how we built APIs at that point and how we tested APIs at that point. And I know some people love it because that's how it is, and some people hate it because that's how it is. And it'll always be like that with tools. It's a little bit in the eye of the beholder if you like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain us a bit how do you probably can automate a lot with SOAP-UI as well as, for example, with Postman? I mean, not just do exploratory testing, but write some automatic scripts. What is the general approach? Do you have some like SOAP-UI specific DSL language for it, or does it integrate with just normal programming languages like Java, JavaScript, to writing some code, which can be, I don't know, generated from? Like what is support for coders for coding?
Sure. So it's more of a traditional tool. From the testing perspective, it's more traditionally, it was geared at non-technical testers. So when you create your functional test, it's basically a sequence of steps. So you can say it's a very high-level programming, but it's not coding, where you have different types of steps you can use to make requests, validate responses, do branching and looping and all that kind of stuff. There's also a step for writing scripts in Groovy, which is a popular scripting language in the Java world, and through Groovy you can do basically anything you want as part of your test. If there's something you want to do that's not supported out of the box by SOAP-UI, you can do it in your Groovy scripts, and people are very creative in what they do. You can gRPC, to your point, if you wanted to do gRPC testing or WebSocket testing, or I don't know, whatever you might want to come up with, you could do that in Groovy. So once you've created your test, you can automate that. There's a command line utilities for running both functional tests, load tests, security tests. So if you want to automate the execution of your tests as part of like a Jenkins build or so on, there's also a Java library you can use if you want to write, let's say you want to integrate with Rest Assured, you might want to run some, I don't know why you want to do that, but you never know. You can use Java code to basically run a SOAP-UI project or test, and then hand it over to some rest assured scripts or some other testing framework you might want to do. But with the constraint that I'm talking Java here, so it's also Java based, similar to rest assured. But what we see very, very common is that people write their tests, create their tests in SOAP UI visually. You program them, and then they use the command line tools similar to Newman for Postman, right? You use the command line runners in SOAP UI to automate the execution of tests as part of your automated build or CI/CD or whatever.
So I think the bottom line is it right to say the bottom line is that if you knew SOAP UI as a tool which is specifically designed to test just web services with SOAP UI, it is longer no more the cases. The tool has evolved and can now support, for example, where it differs very much to Postman, which is, I think, at the moment restricted just to REST, to many protocols. It has also generic scripting support with Groovy language. That you could.
I think.
Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, nice to know it. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. Does someone want to add something on the topic of UI-based tools? Rather, could you give us a sign if you are with us, if you can hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would.
Okay.
Sorry. So I would have a question here related to the SOAP UI. What are the plans and what are the languages that might be supported in the future, or let's say to be compatible with SOAP UI?
How do you mean that? You mean for scripting, or?
Yes, from the scripting point of view.
I think it's JavaScript is, I think, already supported to a certain extent. I don't know if there's been, to be honest, any ask for any other languages. Not that I'm aware of. So if you have a specific ask, I'd be interested in hearing. I think JavaScript is the other language that people have asked for. It's easy to talk Groovy in the Java world, of course, since Groovy's done so well and is so widespread. But for people who are new to testing, many people know JavaScript, and so it would be easier for them to get started with JavaScript for scripting purposes. But I think today you can, as far as I know, you can still do JavaScript, but it's not as powerful as the Groovy functionality. Does that answer your question?
Maybe I can add as well that Rest Assured is also actually using Groovy under the covers. That is what enables the nice, hopefully, JSON extraction and the XML parsing and stuff. So that's all thanks to Groovy.
Isn't it sometimes that to Rest Assured and Groovy that some very large responses cannot be parsed as fast as I wish to? Can you
probably, I don't know,
tell us about background?
Sounds reasonable. I don't know.
So actually, I'm also a practitioner of almost all of the frameworks we are having today, except of SOAP UI. I had also some experience, but it was later in the years. And so my solution to that was, perhaps it will help someone. I wasn't using just built-in expressions of Rest Assured, but just using some dedicated frameworks. I forgot this. Okay, just frameworks which are specialized on parsing large JSONs and do it quickly, and it solved all the problems. So basically, I was using Rest Assured for all the parts except when I had 10 megabytes large response with as JSON and had to parse it. Sometimes it wasn't working as well or as fast as I would wish to. So a few minutes, for example, for just parsing it's way too much. Okay.
Alexei, I have a question for Ole, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course.
If you want to integrate SOAP UI tests in your pipelines, is the scripting option the only path that is available to you?
No. So there's a command line runner. So basically, you would create your SOAP UI tests as you do in the tool. You save the project file, and then there's a command line executable that you run. Similar like to Newman for Postman. So you write, it's a runner, and then you path to the project file, and then which test case and test suite you want to run, and there's a bunch of parameters related to the execution. So you don't have to do any scripting at all to automate the execution. I think the scripting is more if you want to do things inside your tests that aren't supported by the test steps that are by default available for you in SOAP UI. Does that answer your question, Antonello?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out afterwards if that didn't help. Happy to help.
Okay.
Maybe I can just briefly respond to your what you said about large payloads and rest assured. And I mean, I'm sure that you're right. I've never used it with such large payloads myself. So but I just want to say that the rest assured is modular as well. So you don't have to use everything. It is not a one size fits all solution. So you can, if you just want to use like rest assured to get your request and then use another library, you can do that without bringing in all your all dependencies, and vice versa. You can use another HTTP client if you like to get the data, and then use the JSON path library that is shipped with rest assured if you want to parse it. So you have lots of options.
Thank you.
I can add to that. I think we've definitely had cases where we've had users with responses to hundreds of megabytes. In the era when everything was to be XML, like 15 years ago, and everyone loved XML, and you would have these data dumps with, that SOAP UI would never handle such a thing, and it's also restricted by the libraries used under the hood. And it's great that you have options like rest assured, right, where you can actually, the cases that you can't handle with a tool like SOAP UI or Postman or something else, where you can then go into rest assured. And now, as Johan was saying, you can even kind of replace the underlying engines that are used for HTTP. So there's all opportunities to really handle those very specific cases if you look at, by kind of mixing the tools that are available.
I can also add that specifically Postman doesn't work well with large payloads as well. It's actually known. I think it's known issue, but it isn't solved yet. So if your payment is more than a few megabytes, a Postman may freeze or crash even. So it's also a typical problem. Not every project, of course, having such large payloads in responses, but if, then you must know your tool's restrictions or workarounds how to solve it. Okay. So let's switch to the next very specific kind of API testing this would be contract testing. Mm-hmm. Antonella, contract testing, and Pact is one example of it. Pact is
Yes, that's right. So I mean, the focus of contract testing is quite different from what we would consider, let's say, traditionally API testing. And it's really meant to guarantee the compatibility of who uses your API and you as a provider of an API. So Pact is a tool that can help you with contract testing, and Pact was born as a practical way of following a pattern that you mentioned earlier, which is consumer-driven contracts. And effectively, to put it simply, consumer-driven contracts implies that the onus of defining what an API should offer should be a responsibility of the consumers. In other words, if I'm a consumer of an API, then it's in my interest to say to the world out there, and specifically, to whoever maintains the API, this is how I'm using you. You might have 100 endpoints. These are the 10 endpoints that I consume, and this is how I consume them. And how I consume it might be, for example, which fields of a specific response I'm using as a consumer. And a consumer in this sense can be, anyone who calls an API. It could be a web application. It could be a sort of native mobile application. And so in the case, for example, of just one API with multiple consumers, using consumer-driven contracts, and it helps with the problem of the provider for having to support multiple clients. So if they want to make a change, they will have a way of knowing who's using the API, how they are using it, so that it becomes safer and easier to make changes to an API. So it's kind of like a different pattern from saying, hey, I'm an API, this is what I do, use me, if something breaks, the problem is yours. This is empowering the consumers to say to the world out there, hey, this is how we're using you, please don't break us. If you break us, let us know.
Does it really work? I mean, not technically, but can you perhaps tell us some stories or success story or fail stories? Because in typical and old-fashioned world is always, if I am an owner and creator of some service, I want to control it. So I want to tell my customer, my consumers, how to use it. It was always, I think, 20 years or 10 years, even 10 years ago, was the only strategy, probably the only strategy at all. And now we are switching the side, and then now the consumer is telling me how my service is supposed to work. There would be some communication.
Yeah, you're touching on some interesting points actually, and I think there are a few things in the things that you mentioned that are important for something like Pact to work, and specifically Pact to work. So one is that whoever develops, the consumer and the provider, ideally would work in the same organization. Or let's say there is some level of communication possible between the two. So something like Pact is not recommended, for example, if what you're doing is providing public APIs, then third parties might be using. So I think one assumption is that you are, if you develop a consumer and a provider, you are either in the same team or in the same organization, and you can talk to each other. So the way I described it was, it's very consumer focused, and it sounds almost like the consumer dictates what should happen, but I think it's more collaborative than that. So it's around having conversations on the contracts. For example, if you're designing a new API or a new endpoint, and a provider being responsive to what the consumers actually need. But the same thing could happen throughout, just maintenance or further changes to APIs. The focus is really the communication and empowering the consumers to make it public how they're using the APIs. It's just a way of fostering that communication. So the team that develops the API will still be responsible for that, would make their own choices, but at the end of the day, they are providing some level of interface that other people will use, and it's also in their interest to make sure that they don't accidentally break their contract.
Okay, so as far as I understood, Pact or contract, perhaps even in general, contract-driven, consumer-driven contract testing is good when there are different teams in one organization. Probably not as good when if the teams are spread around the globe, not not geographically, but that there are just different organizations with not good communication channels. But what if we have, for example, just one or two teams who are working on multiple endpoints, consuming and providing? Is it a good idea to try to do this kind of testing, or is it too small now? Too small scope if it's just one or two teams doing whole work? What do you think?
I mean, I think it depends on what kind of architecture is beyond the work that those teams do. So if, for example, you work in an environment where you only have one consumer and one provider, I think Pact can offer value, but I think it really shines when perhaps there's more than one provider, more than one consumer. I wouldn't say that using it in a very simple setup wouldn't be recommended, but I think it really provides most of its value when perhaps there's more than a couple of applications involved. So if those 2 or 3 teams that you mentioned actually work across multiple applications, then I think using Pact makes sense. And there are 2 reasons why it makes sense. Yes, Pact solves the problem of making sure that you don't accidentally break your contracts. It also helps with the communication between consumers and providers. But it also gives another advantage, that because of the way Pact is written, it also allows you to do basically integration testing, but without having to write end-to-end tests. So the way the framework is built implies that in order to verify a contract, you have to write some tests, both on the consumer side and on the provider side. And the way you write these tests is to actually go in via your HTTP layer. So what happens is on the consumer side, you have to write some tests using some specific patterns, and the pattern is the same. Obviously, the way you go about it depends on the language that you're using. But to write those tests that end up producing a contract, which is a JSON file, which is called a pact, you actually have to make real HTTP requests against a mocked version of your provider. So that happens on the consumer side. So you're basically testing your consumer and the real HTTP requests that it makes. And then you take that file, the pact file, the documents, your contracts, and you use it to replay this contract on your provider. So on the provider side, you are taking the pact and you are writing some tests using the pact framework to exercise your own provider and making the exact requests that a consumer documented in the pact. So it's almost like testing these 2 applications together, but you break it up. And this is amazing, especially when you've got a lot of consumers and providers, because going back to what I was mentioning earlier, if you want to test complex integration scenarios where there are lots of applications involved, it's just going to drive you crazy. So the ability of kind of breaking it up and taking each pair in isolation and not only testing the contracts, but also doing the system integration allows you to test things more easily. And because, to be honest, in a distributed architecture, there are, well, mainly, let's say these days, 2 ways of communicating, which is either synchronously via some kind of HTTP protocol or asynchronously via some kind of messaging. And Pact gives you the ability of doing both. We're talking about APIs today, so but overall, you can solve the problem of integration testing without having to worry about end-to-end tests, or without relying on end-to-end tests to do the majority of your integration testing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now we have a question from our from our spectators. So, what is the difference? And just a moment, I want to remind you that we are having a Slido with the code which is above. You can enter the site and ask your question through the system. So the question is, what is the difference between consumer-driven contract testing and just generally contract testing? Actually, I think it's almost talked about it already.
I think we kind of answered that. Just to mention something, there are some other approaches of doing contract testing that are more provider focused, and Pact wasn't designed to do that. But I think there's been more interest recently in that kind of approach. So the Pact maintainers are working on to try and find ways to support also a more provider-driven approach. With provider-driven, we just mean particularly that it's more the provider that says this is my specification, and so the consumers then will verify that they can work with that specification rather than the other way around.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Just to make consumer-driven, provider-driven again. Okay. It was a joke. Just a question, a typical question. Of course, it will be easy to test contracts written with with REST based API approach. What's about, for example, classic web services or some other protocols? What is the state of things now? How it is supported by Pact?
I think you don't have to have REST APIs in order to be able to write Pact tests. So on that side of the world, I think as long as you can serialize your contract into a JSON format, then you can use Pact. As I mentioned, there are also messaging, and messaging is also supported by Pact. So you can, if you're using message queues to do integration between applications, then you can also use Pact for that. Does that answer your question?
Yep, probably. So, okay, so it is technically possible to use it with other protocols other than REST. Okay. Yes. Okay. Then now, can other participants add something to contract testing?
I would like to add here something. I've seen a lot of people using contract testing for generating the documentation. So once you use contract testing, you will have the API very well documented. Mm-hmm. And my questions to the others would be the following. Let's say from the percent point of view, how much would increase the effort to do contract testing or to have a similar approach versus without using contract testing? So what is the percent of effort that is required to add this feature?
So I think I read two questions there. One is around the documentation, and the other one is around effort, and perhaps effort versus value. So on the documentation side of things, so because of the way Pact works, it's basically contract testing by example, because the consumer says, this is how I'm using a specific API. What you end up with is a set of example of real usage. So Pact specifically is great because it gives you that level of documentation. So it doesn't document the API in the sense that it doesn't give you like, for example, Swagger documentation might do, to say this is the whole specification of this endpoint. But what it gives you is a clear understanding of who's using which APIs and how, which is something that often other ways of documenting APIs don't give you. This is particularly good because if as an API one day you decide to deprecate a field or change it, it can tell you immediately, who am I going to break if I make this change? And with normal documentation, you can't have that. So it doesn't replace documenting your API well, but it gives another dimension on top of that. The other part around effort, I mean, we are talking about writing tests here, and I think we know that there's always quite a bit of effort involved in writing tests. But I wouldn't be able to tell you, let's say, how much effort it is to write Pact tests versus not writing them. But what I can tell you is that one of the great advantages that we've at Triplet, for example, are leveraging is the fact that when we want to release one of our services, we don't have to worry about doing lots of compatibility and manual testing with all the other services. Pact gives us the ability to make sure that whether we are compatible with all the other services that are already in production. So if we want to release just one of our dozens of services, Pact can give us that. If we didn't do that, we would have to rely on some kind of more convoluted type of integration testing, perhaps end-to-end testing. We would have to test a lot on real environments and having to deal with all the data setup and all of that. So whilst certainly writing these tests constitutes effort and getting the pipeline in place so that the whole workflow works, the benefit that you get is that you can move more closely towards a continuous delivery setup, where it's your pipeline that tells you whether you can actually release and whether you are compatible with everything else that is running in production.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think it's super powerful that if you're kind of in a group organization where you have a bunch of services that you're evolving by different teams and they're being consumed by different teams, so it's like a microservices architecture, and you don't want to have a release every 3 months, but you want to be able to release continuously as you make improvements. Having something like Pact to give you that safety net to make sure that these changes you're pushing out, even if you think they're small or this shouldn't break anything, right? We've all said that. Having that safety net in place, to ensure that, or give you an added sense of security that these changes will not actually break any consumers of my API as they are using the API today. It's a huge value. It's a huge value for companies to be able to push out updates on a daily basis versus to have to synchronize, coordinate on a monthly or weekly basis. I'm just speaking from my own experience. So I think that's where Pact really shines, in those kind of where you have a very distributed and very heterogeneous architecture.
Yeah. I think if we didn't have Pact, we would be in a very difficult position, and I think it would be very difficult to release. We'd probably release services crossing our fingers and hoping that there are there's no breaking changes in compatibility.
Yeah, and we'll spend a lot of time on running regression tests and making sure that Selenium or whatever you might be using, making sure that everything seems to work. Let's push it out, and then everyone's on call to roll back if something didn't work.
Yeah. And that frees up time and effort to actually focus on testing, if we're talking about APIs here. So testing our APIs properly. And so without having to worry about everybody else's APIs, we know that Pact covers that. And so we can then go and do the functional testing that we want to do on the applications that we are working on, using tools like the ones that we're talking about today and other types of testing on our API-based services.
Yeah, maybe I can add as well, because I think it's super interesting and important that you also support messaging. I think especially if you're using like a microservice approach, then messages are extremely important. And if you break a message and you're not backward compatible, for example, you can break a lot of things in your system. So having this as an additional layer of security, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. I can also add just a little bit, I think, and actually I had also this in my practice, and sometimes even if we are delivering the new versions of our endpoints on a regular basis, like every week, it is not always possible to update every possible client with the new version. For example, if some clients are distributed on iPads, on some standalone hardware devices, and other clients are web clients. So web clients are automatically, like you say, automatically updated on the server side. And in some cases, you cannot just update every client simultaneously of the newer version. And then Pact has this nice function, which I like very much. Can I deploy? Yes, and you could actually double check your setup, even if you not just going smoothly from version 1 to version 2, but you have really a puzzle with many different versions which are live simultaneously and must still be supported, to check to check if they will be working together with these very changes in microservices. Is it right?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Can I Deploy is actually at the core of making Pact work. If you are so, Can I Deploy is basically, we haven't talked about the Pact Broker, but the Pact Broker, it's a web application that where you can store your contracts and where you can store what they're called the verification results. So when the provider verifies contracts, he can post to the broker and he can say, hey, I verified myself against this version of the contract. And so it holds all the information that you need. And Can I Deploy is basically a command line tool that interrogates the Pact Broker, and it tells you, well, you can ask, is this version of this specific application compatible with this other application? Or is it compatible with all the applications that are running in production or on your staging environment? So you can make it really easy to do those checks, and you can incorporate those checks in your CI pipelines at any stage. So even if you make just a tiny code change and you push it on your branch or to master, you can immediately have a reassurance of whether you might have broken compatibility with any of the APIs that you interact with.
Yeah, thank you. And we have some other question from our polls, and zwar, when would you use a functional testing tool like REST Assured SOAP UI Postman versus contract testing such as Pact? Should we use both? Is it alternative, or is it something additional? It's actually, I think
maybe I could have a go if or was the question targeted to you?
No.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I interrupted everything, so I'll just continue. So I'm thinking that, I mean, let's take an example. Maybe you've written a beautiful REST API. You're with Hypermedia, and you're like Richardson maturity level 3, and everything is fine. And you're testing this API, and it looks great to you, but maybe the consumer, maybe have a communication problem or something. The consumer doesn't understand how to use Hypermedia, and they just consume the API as you normally do, like an HTTP API, and you ignore the links and stuff. Then I suppose that a tool like Pact could actually catch this, because if you change the semantics of your API, then Pact can help you to discover these things as well, regardless if you have like very nice testing your actual service API. So I think that you can use them together.
Yeah, definitely. I think the easy answer is that if you want to do contract testing, you need something else to do your functional testing. Pact and contract testing shouldn't really be focused on functional testing, because otherwise it just defeats the purpose and it explodes in the amount of testing that you want to do. So if you use something like Pact, then as I said earlier, you can focus on testing your services and doing that well. Do functional testing using the best tools for that, and some of the ones that we talked about today. Do your unit testing, and then use Pact if you want to use Pact to test the integration.
I can also just give an example for this. For example, you have a simple service which, let's say, is returning some actual temperature for some city, let's say. Yes, and with contract testing and Pact, you would check that your parameter formats are okay, so the service doesn't break if your request has the format you are using. Then the second would be the response codes. If it's response codes that are expected, like 200 or all possible error codes, that would be contract testing. And the functional testing would be, of course, to see if different cities are given the right temperatures, if it's positive, negative, it's Fahrenheit or Celsius. So like that would be functional tests which are not supposed to be done with PACT.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, PACT really, I didn't mention that, but PACT really focuses on when we say contract, it's really on the format of either the request or the response, or the resource that you are making a request to, the verb, the HTTP response, like you mentioned. An example of something quite trivial that actually like has happened to me or to one of the teams that I've worked with. It's something similar to the example of the temperature that you mentioned. So let's say that in your response body, you're returning a temperature, and you've always returned it as a numeric value, right? 25. And so the JSON field is actually numeric. And then somebody at some point, intentionally or unintentionally, because it happens, decides that perhaps that temperature value should be serialized string. Perhaps because they thought that adding, the type of Fahrenheit or Celsius would be the right thing to do. And so if you're using PACT, then when you run your test on your API, on your provider side, you would immediately realize that somebody is actually using that field. They're expecting an integer, for example, and so you're going to break them. And so it's this sort of contract stuff that we're interested in. Whether the temperature is correct or not, you shouldn't worry about it when it comes to PACT. That's what your functional tests are for.
Okay, perhaps the last question about PACT and its competitors. I know, for example, that the other popular approach is Spring Cloud Cloud Contract or something like this. Could you point out the differences?
Yeah,
it's also consumer driven.
Well, that's a good question. So originally, Spring Cloud Contract was written specifically for the Spring and JVM ecosystem. Now it can also be used with non-JVM languages, so that kind of barrier has gone. And also, originally was written specifically following a more provider-driven approach. It is possible to do consumer-driven contract testing with Spring Cloud Contract, but there are some challenges with that. Or let's say the way of doing it is different from PACT. So I guess that if you really want to, my recommendation would be, if you're interested in contract testing, probably to try multiple approaches. So if you work in the JVM space or not, perhaps try both and see which one works best for you. But I would say that the main competitor is really Spring Cloud Contract. There's no one else out there. You can also use the PACT broker with Spring Cloud Contract if you want, which gives you kind of a nice way of sharing your PACTs. There's a page on the website of PACT where all the documentation is that talks about a comparison with other tools, and it's explained quite well actually what the major differences are and why you might want to go for one or another in a bit more detail than perhaps that I can give in a quick explanation.
Okay. I will just make another remark in addition that actually typically when you're writing PACT test, you're writing it on two sides, on side of consumer and on side of provider. And technically, and in some cases, it's really the true fact that you could use completely different programming languages for your provider and for your consumer. And actually, the PACT is available in almost every possible language.
That's right.
To code with. Yes, Java, JavaScript, even Ruby, or even Ruby, because I think Ruby was initially the language of PACT, as far as I know. And so you could also write tests using mixed languages. For example, you could write tests for your provider in one language and for your consumer in another language. So it's very compatible on this level.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, as far as I understood, you could also integrate even contracts written with other frameworks like Spring contracts. Yes.
Yeah, the Pact broker, yes, it's definitely compatible. Yeah, with that. I mean, if I were to kind of summarize, for example, why you might want to use Pact versus Spring contract, it's probably if you are just tied to the JVM. So if all you do is JVM based, then perhaps Spring contract might be easier. There's less of a learning curve. But if you were, like you suggested, for example, you have services written in different languages, then Pact is gonna probably allow you to have workflows that work better for you. So if you want flexibility in your Chess language, Pact might be more suitable.
Thank you. Now we have something which is not a question, but I want to read it loudly anyway. From Giuseppe, we have started using contract testing with Pact recently, and we are really seeing the benefits of it. Also, the community behind is great. Thank you, Giuseppe, for sharing. Okay. So now I want to remind you that we will have another 15 minutes of our talk. So please ask questions with Slido. It's the last chance. Okay. And now I actually want to ask some even more specific questions about some of your frameworks. Rest assured. Johan, do you have bigger plans for enhancements for Rest Assured? How is it going? Or
I have a lot of plans in my head, but it's a matter of time. I need I don't know, twice as much time during the day that I have available or more. No, but I really want to. As I mentioned earlier, Rest Assured is based on Groovy, but I want to actually get away from Groovy in the core library because it's not actually needed there. It's I think you can make Rest Assured significantly faster if you remove Groovy from the core. So that's one thing that I want to do. I will still keep it for when it comes to parsing the actual content. But as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to use those libraries if you don't like. So for example, you can pick there are other libraries in Java for parsing JSON, but you can still benefit from using the API of Rest Assured and use them as well. And if so, it will be faster if I remove Groovy. So that's one thing. I also want to because now it's also based on Apache HTTP client under the hood. So I like to make it more modular to support other clients as well. And I think that's quite doable. I just need some time to actually do it. I think, and also GraphQL support. I know people have actually sent quite nice pull requests, but I don't know. I don't want to have it in the core. So I think it has to. We need to work on it in a module, and that can be a little bit tricky. But that's one thing that is on the roadmap.
Okay. Another question: are you working alone at it? At Rest Assured? I mean,
sorry, what did you say?
Completely alone. You don't have a team of supporters. It's just, I know it's open source, so anybody could just put a pull request on it. But actually, you are just a lonely wolf.
Yeah, more or less. It's it's more or less me and a lot of pull requests. And I really appreciate all the pull requests, but. Yeah, of course, and I'd love for more people to join. That would be great because I have, time is limited, and I have lots of other projects as well. So it would be great if more people join. And we're we're 5 people here. You can all join later tonight.
Yeah.
I will introduce you.
Yes. Use the platform. Perhaps you can get more core contributors that will just merge requests or write fixes without
Yeah, that would be great.
Having to use the time. Okay. So if it's wanted, then okay, you're welcome to join Jan on his team. Okay. So. Let's switch to SOAP UI.
Yay.
Okay. So can you, Ole, just shortly explain us? So I guess there is a free version of SOAP UI and there are some payable versions. Could you make some introduction? What can everybody get for free and start working starting from today? And what are the investment and why they are worth it?
Okay, I can try. So SOAP UI is free and open source. So it's on GitHub. So for free, you get all basic functionality. So you get functional testing, mocking, or virtualization, or load testing and security testing. You kind of get a little bit of everything, right, for free. And then the commercial tool is now called Ready API. So it's a tool that basically adds a bunch of features onto that base. So you can create your projects in the open source SOAP UI, and then you can, if you choose to evaluate or trial or go with the commercial Ready API, you can open those projects there, and then you can add more stuff to them. And I think the features there are very much around just added productivity for testers. So it's, for example, data-driven testing is something that's been very popular in the testing community. So say you have a data set in an Excel sheet or a database, and you want to run your tests for each, input, output values, etc. So it's really, really easy to kind of create those kind of data-driven tests. And that could be for any protocol, right? So this is not for SOAP specifically. It could be for REST, it could be for GraphQL, for anything. You can combine them in any way you want. So it's not uncommon where you say you have both SOAP and REST. You have some legacy part of your architecture, and then you have some more modern part where you exposing APIs to mobile front end or whatever. And you want to integrate those tests. And you can do that in the open source as well, but in the commercial version, things are just easier. There's functionality around coverage, for example. There's functionality around refactoring your tests. So, for example, it will automatically, if you change your contracts for the APIs you're testing, it'll automatically update the assertions, etc., in line with those changes for your contracts. There's support for reporting. There's support for plugins. There's just a bunch of more features. I think. Although I do think you'll get pretty far with the free version, which is, depending on who you ask, it's SmartBear a good thing or a bad thing. But I think it's great, actually. That I think it's really important that people are able to, build good APIs or create, sufficient API tests with the basic tool. And then if they have more advanced or enterprisey needs around protocols or whatever, they can, of course, upgrade to the commercial version. I actually don't know the cost of the commercial version, but you can go to SmartBear and find out. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you for information.
Sure. Okay.
I see the next question from our will complement your answer, and it's about Rest Assured and Pact. How are Rest Assured and Pact are managed? Are there any commercial backing to keep them alive, like SOAP UI? So it's the other way around. I think Rest Assured is completely free, and Pact also almost completely free. Do you have some plans to make in some commercials offerings? Okay, do you, I don't know, support donation? Can you explain this part, or it's free and that's fine?
Shall I go first?
To start? Why not?
Yeah. So Pact is actually completely open source. So you can go a long way by not having to spend any money on actually buying sort of any software. So all the client, the implementations in the various languages are open source. The Pack Broker is open source. This is, for example, what we do at Treatwell. We are going with all the open source side of Pact. However, Pact has got commercial backing. In its there's a product called PactFlow, which is effectively packed with some extra support and some extra features added to it. You don't have to use it, but it's just an additional option for you, and some of the things are managed, for example, hosting on a Pack Broker and all these things that you might not want to do yourself. But that's to say that there is also commercial backing. So there's definitely an interest from some of the maintainers to keep working on Pact and on the open source side of things, also because there's definitely some commercial backing behind it. And the company where sort of Pact started is also heavily invested. It's a consultancy company in Australia, and they're backing up Pact heavily. So it's kind of like one of the questions that often comes up with any open source tools. It's like, am I gonna choose this tool now and then a year down the line support stops and I'm screwed? Which is one of the questions that at Treatwell we wanted to get reassurance from. And I think the support and dialogue with community or maintainers and seeing how actively actually the whole Pact system is maintained can be a reassurance on their front.
Yeah, thank you. Johan? What's about your tool?
Yeah, I wish I could say the same for Rest Assured, but I can't. It's mainly me, and I'm mainly working on it on my spare time. So I don't know. Maybe it has gotten a bit too big for its own good, maybe. But I try to maintain it for the best of my ability, and so far I've managed to maintain it for 9 years, and I have no plans on stop doing that, but I don't know. I mean, I cannot make any promises on roadmaps or keeping deadlines or anything like that. That's impossible for me. Yeah, I actually did add buy me a coffee button, I don't know, a couple of months ago. So maybe that's one way to support the project.
Okay. Hopefully you will get enough coffee for your life.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think in Sweden the coffee consumption is great, so it's not so easy to achieve. Okay. So one specific question for Antonello. Actually, Rado, if you want to add something, please just try to get in. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
So,
everything's fine.
I would have a rhetorical question. I don't expect to get the response. Even if the tool that we're using to define contract testing and do automatically API testing are not the most important thing in a case that we have a bug or an issue, especially from the open source ones. Enterprise companies are usually enterprise and bigger and larger organizations are looking for tools where they have support. Let's say 8 to 4 support for 5 days of the week. And there are some problems, especially when you want to incorporate tools where you cannot find this kind of support. And yeah, maybe as Johan said, buy me a coffee. It's fine for non-commercial use and for some isolated commercial use. But there are some special situations where, from the contractual point of view, you need to use tools that are offering support, even if it's paid. How do you see this? How we could get this kind of support from the tools that you're working on, or if it's possible?
I can answer for Pact. I don't really get any commercial or financial benefit myself. I'm really passionate about Pact, and I find the community around Pact and the guys who created it, and they are the heaviest maintainers, super accessible. So even on the open source side of things, I feel that I've always have a community to reach out to. But I see your point that obviously if you are a large corporate, you might want more than that. And that's where PactFlow comes into place. And also associated with PactFlow, there are some commercial partners that basically do active consultancy on the adoption of Pact itself. So if a large corporate wants some kind of third-party support, either on the onboarding or the tool or ongoing support, there's always that possibility. But I think one of the main differences is that here we're talking about a solution that might have important implications across all your estate. And so I think that's, in those cases, perhaps you might want to get some extra help.
Thank you.
Yeah, for SoapUI, it's pretty straightforward. You pay for the commercial version. I think that's one of the reasons you would do to get support, because it's part of the package is guaranteed support. So we have customers that actually pay for the commercial version but don't use it, and they continue to use the open source version, but now they have access to support 24/7.
Yeah,
great.
My personal opinion that for such cases, if some enterprise really wants to use a framework, for example, Rest Assured, where Johan just doesn't have any possibility to make such great commercial offers, which big companies like SmartBear, they just have a opportunity to make him offer that he cannot decline. They can just, I don't know, come to him and say, okay, we will pay you the whole year salary, just help us with our tool. So there is also always options. It depends on how badly a company will to want to have this tool or framework. But okay.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I mean, I can, I'm also open for consultancy if that's something that a company would like. And I also know that there are other, since Rest Assured is quite known, I mean, there are quite a lot of offerings out there for support already with consultancy and stuff like that. So I don't think there is actually, from the Rest Assured side, I don't think there is a lack of support if you want to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, a short question about Pact. There is a so-called Pact specification. It would be rather technical. Pact specification, which is now in version 4, or I think version 4 is evolving.
Version 4.
What are the what are the major features, major differences? What in what direction does it evolve?
So there's something called the Pact specification, which is basically the specification of the Pact files themselves, and the Pact files are where the contracts are specified. So in terms of evolution of features for Pact, they don't really necessarily evolve hand in hand with a versioning of the Pact specification. So the Pact Broker is a product in itself, and it's got a central role. And so there's a feature roadmap and additional features that are added, for example, to the Pact Broker to make it easier to integrate with your CI and CD pipelines. And then there are additional features that are added independently by maintainers to the various language-specific libraries. When it comes to the specification, the current one is actually v3, which is used by Pact JVM. All the other client implementations use v2. There's a v4 in the works. I think there are some exciting changes in there, but that primarily around so-called matching, which is just a way of making sure that you can verify contracts without having to worry about the value of the properties that you're interested in. So V4 is evolving in that sense to make it even easier for people to say this is what I expect, but without having to expect specific values in your responses. But most of the exciting developments are around other features, not necessarily, and not just on the fact specification. There's a Canny page actually in Pact where it shows the current evolution of the features that are being worked on, the features that are planned, the ones that have just been completed. So if you're interested in seeing what's coming up, I think it's if you Google Canny and Pact, I think you're gonna get there.
Okay, thank you. I think we are just a little bit out of our time that we have planned, but actually I can stay for another 10 minutes. A question: if you all can stay, or if someone must go, then you're free to leave. Around now, I will ask probably the last question. Ole, you want to? Okay. So I will ask the last question and the last question, and if you have time and want to answer it, please answer for all. The question will be for all. So it's about integration of API testing in modern CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous delivery systems, and support from your instruments, from your tools to it. So in most cases, no automated testing is working standalone right now. So we are writing tests with some tools and then integrated in our continuous integration pipelines typically. Can you just tell a few words about how is it for your tool? Ole, you can start if you want, or someone else.
Sure. I think similar to the question that was asked by Antonello earlier. So for SoapUI, there are command line runners to run functional tests, load tests, security tests, and even mock services if you want to run those as part of your integration tests, if you want to mock out external dependencies. So you basically author your tests in SoapUI, you save the SoapUI project file, and then make sure that that's part of your source tree. So if you're using GitHub or Git specifically, and then as a build step in Jenkins, for example, you would run the SoapUI command line runner to run those tests or load tests or functional tests or whatever. So, and then the output of those is in the JUnit XML format, so you can integrate the response into the reports that are generated by Jenkins. So it's pretty straightforward.
Do you have plugins? Do you have dedicated plugins, for example, for Jenkins, TeamCity, I don't know, for GitLab?
No, it's
which
command line.
Making this
It's a standalone command line tool that you have to install on the server that's running Jenkins or whatever, and then run it from there. So there aren't. I think for the commercial tool, once again, I think there is a Ready API plugin which might make those things easier. But it's definitely doable with the open source free version.
Yeah, and where you mentioned the reporting, do you have some also integration to third-party reporting engines? I don't know, Allure or something else. There are actually also a couple of instruments which helps with report presentation, like you typically test generating, XMLs with the results, and then do you have some?
No, we don't. And there are some. Oh, I forgot the name. There's some result aggregation tools out there that support SoapUI natively. So the other way around, they have plugins for SoapUI, but there are no specific plugins in SoapUI or Ready API, as far as I know. But there's a plugin SDK. So if you're eager to write some plugins in Java, you can do that to push out the results to whatever external system you might have.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, next one.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk a bit about Rest Assured's case, because Rest Assured you just run. It's just a HTTP library, so you just run it with any framework that you like. I mean, I typically combine it with some like test containers, so you can set up databases and Docker images and stuff like that. And usually it integrates really well with the existing. I mean, if you're using a framework, you don't have to do that, obviously. But if you're using Spring or Micronaut or Quarkus or something like that, it integrates well with them as well.
Uh-oh. Hello. Are we back again?
Hi.
One moment.
Yeah.
Nice to
We're back.
We're back. Today, technically, API wasn't tested so well this time. Victor, if you can hear me, just confirm that are we live or not? If not, I will just, if I don't get any response, I suppose let's just talk for 5 minutes and hope that it will be recorded, and
I think
then we'll.
I have a feeling that we are, but maybe we should assume that we are, just in case.
Okay, I just want to shortly add something to Rest Assured. Also, I would ask about testing integration, and as far as I know, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, okay. No. Okay, so as far as I know, Allure reporting system has plugins supporting Rest Assured. So it's also the other way around, but it's perfectly fine. So
okay, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's basically, as far as I know, actually Rest Assured doesn't include testing engine itself. So it's not specifically controls how their output XMLs are generated, but of course, as typical API testing, response and requests are important for logging and test response in tests results, especially if something fails. Most cases you want to know what was a request and what was the response. Yeah, so it's handled then automatically by that frameworks to present it very nicely, to show it in for example, as attachment in your test report, and it is done by Allure for Rest Assured. At least I've used it myself. Okay, now Antonella.
Yes, I mean, I'll keep it short. Pact has really been designed with continuous integration in mind. So I think if you're not integrating with your pipelines, then you're probably not getting much value out of Pact. So on the consumer side, Pact basically what it needs to do is to run some consumer tests, which are effectively just unit tests written in the same language in which your application is written. The side effects of running those tests is the creation of the Pact files. They get published to the Pact broker. And then on the provider side, again, it's just unit tests. Effectively, they are running. They get the Pacts from the Pact broker, and they verify and publish verification results again to the broker. So this is like the basic of continuous integration. But then we talked about can I deploy? And so there are some extra assurances that you can add to your pipelines to make sure that you can actually deploy onto an environment. And when deploying onto an environment means checking whether you are compatible with all the other services that are running on the environment. Classic example is production, because the most important one. But if you have other environments, you might also want to make sure the compatibility before deploying onto any other kind of staging environment. So in terms of CI, let's say that the most native thing that exists in the ecosystem are the webhooks for the Pact broker. So the Pact broker is smart enough to know whether a contract is changed or not, or whether a contract has been verified. And so it can trigger some other actions, which are normally, for example, are invoking other pipelines. But then there might be other stuff that you need to do yourself to configure your pipelines to run these tests and perhaps make calls to Can I Deploy, which is just a command line tool. So there's a lot of documentation on it, but there's no like plugin that you can just put onto your pipelines and it automatically solves all your problems.
Perhaps not yet. But anyone can contribute. I mean, plugins. It's normally the plugins. It's in most cases it's not a thing that you couldn't do with some basic feature of Jenkins or instrument. But they are in some cases they're just making it even more easier than you just choosing like I have packed, and you will just be shown a few fields to fill in with where your tests are. For example, then it will do customized reporting or customized test execution. So it's actually I think it's nice. It's not necessarily to make the thing to go the thing.
I think one of the difficulties is that there are so many languages involved, but there are lots of, for example, when it comes to running Can I Deploy, there are already scripts that are part of the documentation that you can just basically reuse. So it's not like as good as a plugin, but you might not have to rewrite a lot of logic yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you very much all together. I still don't know if we are live. Yes, you are live. Okay, we are live. Nice. Okay. So I want to thank you again, and let's say the last goodbye for now. I mean, so thank you, Johan from Rest Assured. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Antonella.
Hi.
Pleasure.
Goodbye.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise.
Ole? Thank you very much. Yeah. And Rado.
Servus, thank you for having me. Cheers.
Yeah. So perhaps please come to our next panels. I hope we will make it in a few weeks about unit testing. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.